Hi, everyone. I'm Brent Kruger. That's Tahira and Dean. We're going to be talking today all about e-gaming events, esports events, and the biggest names in the business on this episode of Event Icons.
Okay, I'm going to dance this time for sure.
It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #EventIcons.
Presented by Endless Events.
The show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Use the question panel on the webinar to submit your questions. Or you can hop on Twitter. Submit your questions with #EventIcons.
We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show.
Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook.
Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com.
Now, without any further delay, this is #EventIcons.
Well, hello, everybody. I am Tahira Ending, one of the hosts of Event Icons. If you go all the way down to the bottom, you are going to see Brent Kruger, our other host, who has a whole new do this week, which I'm loving. So we're going to be talking today about e-gaming and esports, the biggest non-secret in the events industry. So, I know some of us are event parents whose kids are gamers, and it's time to get out of the box, look at those numbers, tens of thousands in stadiums, millions and millions watching online. This is the ultimate hybrid event. So we are very excited to talk with our guest today. So at the very top, we have Kim Meltzer.
Close enough.
Meltzer?
That's right.
Esports events mom, which I love. And right below her, we've got Joe English, event futurist, and then Donny Neufuss, our friend from PRG. So happy to have you guys here today. We are going to turn it over and ask you guys to tell us about yourselves, because I think there's just a lot going on. So let's start ladies first today. Kim, what got you into the events industry? I know you have a great story.
It stems from 20 years in the hotel business, so doing luxury group travel and having worked with so many corporate and entertainment clients along the way. And within, the 20 years, I actually started my own company in 2007. And about 2010, I had the privilege of working with Donna Graves from Encompass International, and she asked me to help her with an event. And before I knew what I was doing, I was helping her solidify the travel and hospitality for Call of Duty Black Ops 1 for the press review that they were putting together. And the experience blew me away, because as a hotelier, you do events, but nothing to the capacity of video gaming. And that basically opened my entire world into an industry that had never been understood, let alone was growing even at that time rapidly through Activision and their opportunity to show off this brand and franchise that was just taking over the world at that time. And so within that realm, I did a lot of Activision events. And in 2013, they started the first esports Call of Duty event. And 2015, there was another one, and it kept going. And we were doing COD XP, and I was just honored and privileged to work with that team. And so from there, I became the esports event mom and was taking care and raising pro players through all these different events and creating the relationships with the developers and the publishers and the sponsors. And I took over the travel and hospitality component and began to build that experience in the esports and video game industry. And here I am now.
Look there you are. What would you be doing if you weren't in the events industry?
That's a really good question. Probably still in the hotel. Group travel is so much fun. Travel in general will never die. And esports is taking it into a whole different realm now, which is fun. But I get to travel more now than I ever had. So I'm actually living my dream. I have to say, I don't even know what it would be like without it. I don't know what esports and video game isn't at this point. It's so in my life.
That's amazing. Thank you. Joe, event futurist. I know you've also had a pretty storied and exciting career. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I was 25 years in high tech. The last 15 years of that part of my career, I was with Intel. And at Intel, I was the creative director in the events department. We did all kinds of really cool stuff, sports sponsorships and big events. And it was great. It was a whirlwind to get to go to all kinds of different events all over the world. And in the sort of the last few years of that, I started working on the Intel Extreme Masters Tour, which is a big video game tour that goes around the world and then culminates in a world championship in Poland. And so got to work on that with Superfly Productions and ESL, and that was kind of my first taste in that area. But I also started doing research at that time, and I've spent a lot of time doing research about the future direction of events and where technology is going, things like that. About 4 years ago, I left Intel and have been consulting with companies and spent about a year building an esports show. And now I'm just working, with companies that want to get into this space or do stuff and understand this landscape, which is pretty complicated. But we'll try to decomplicate some of that today, I hope.
Which we're excited about. Now, what would you be doing if there wasn't this?
I would probably be playing Clash Royale or Fortnite with my kid and not doing any more traveling. But yeah, I like to play, and I wouldn't also like Kim wouldn't mind just being in a hotel somewhere, but it would probably be in Bali or someplace like that where Tahira's on her way to in a couple weeks. So
Absolutely.
It's going to be great. Now, Donny, you also have a super interesting history that's brought you to a completely different part of the industry. So tell us about it.
Do I, though? Is it really that interesting? I'm glad that
Yes.
you think so.
You're fascinating.
So I'll preface this with my first system was a ColecoVision. I went then from the Atari 2600. I then went to an IBM PS2, 16 megahertz with 1 meg memory and 20 megs of hard drive space, $3,000 to my parents. I then had an Amiga 500. I went through all the Nintendo systems, including the one with the robot and the zapper. And I've been a lifelong gamer. And then I was playing online competitive games on the Amiga 500 back when there was 2400 baud modems. So it's kind of been my life. But my professional career got actually started in the music industry. I worked in the early dot-coms, worked for a company that built online technology in its infancy for people like Warner Chappell. We built the online voting mechanism for the Academy Country Music Awards. We built all kinds of new tech. I remember we met with Apple and told them that people were going to sell music online, and they laughed at us. And then 3 years later, iTunes came out. So I came from that side of the industry, and then through circumstance, I got involved in a company called Sonic Foundry, which actually used to be in the music industry, but was more in the streaming side. And they were starting up an events company division for streaming content online and capturing it, which was kind of a novelty at the time. And worked there for 7 years, which led me to PRG. PRG, we are the largest production technology company in the world. We got 44 offices around the globe. We just announced an acquisition of VER, so that's another 30-some offices there. So growing by leaps and bounds. And about 2 years ago, I got a phone call where they decided they were going to start putting in verticals and specialties and have people kind of run the strategy on those verticals. And they called me and said, "Hey, we're doing a lot of work in this esports stuff, and you're a big gamer. Do you want to lead the esports vertical?" And I said, "Well, let me think about it." "Sure, I'll do that." And then I went downstairs and I danced in front of my wife. And I said, "You're never going to guess what they asked me to do." So PRG as a whole, we do like the E-League work. We work with obviously ESL, work on a bunch of the tournaments on the production side, where the guys wearing the black shirts in the back, plugging stuff in and doing all the technology there. So it's a lot of fun. And what's really interesting is PRG, because of who we are and all the different markets that we play in, film and television, concert touring and all that, it's also allowed us to have some really interesting conversations, not just with the people in esports, but the people who are helping support esports. Like we've been talking to state and local government. The state of Georgia has a 30% tax incentive, like for the movie industry, for esports, and talking to the people who are building these facilities around the world. So it's been really an interesting and fascinating space to play in.
No kidding. It's it's like I said, it's growing by leaps and bounds in ways people have absolutely never imagined. So Let's cover the basics. So we say esports. What does that mean? Maybe I know, Joe, you said you had a great definition for us.
Yeah, I sat down a little over a year ago to answer that question because I was building a show and we wanted to know, well, what is an esport versus a video game just in general? So here's what we came up with, and this was my own definition. But the first is it's a competitive video game that has a clear win condition, meaning there's a winner and a loser. So there's all kinds of video games that you can play endlessly, but esports are not that. There is a winner and a loser. They're typically played individually or in teams. So you can it could be 1-on-1, it could be 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 5-on-5, or now what you're seeing is a lot of these major battle royale games where it might be one versus 99 others, so 100 players, or even 50-on-50 squads. So that's the first thing. The second is we tend to see there's a league or a professional scene that's sort of vibrant around a particular game. So at any given time, there are lots of leagues out there that are having tournaments, and we see they sort of come up and down in their popularity based on what's going on in the community. And the last thing is that there's what we just say is kind of a vibrant community supporting it. So some games will go on forever. You look at a game like StarCraft that was one of the original esports, it's still there. But kind of the ones that we track as the major esports are the ones that are really hot right now. And so that would be things like right now, Fortnite, Call of Duty, League of Legends, Overwatch, Hearthstone. There are vibrant communities around all of those games. So that's kind of what we're talking about here.
And Kim, you are embedded in those communities.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that I probably learned in the last 8 years is the esports is the event that brings the publishers, the developers, the sponsors, anyone that is interested in the playing tournament side of it into a complete area that they can all kind of interject with. So it's not behind the screen anymore. Now it's a physical place to go where you can interact and meet those people that you played with on the screen, or you get to meet the developer, you get to meet all of the different entities that come together at that event, which they have really made a fun experience now. And they're learning to activate it even at different levels where these kids can't wait to come because they get to really see it come alive in front of them instead of in a screen setting. So.
Anything to add to that? Oh, go ahead, Brent.
Oh, I was just going to say, Joe, you mentioned a few of the games. I mean, Kim or Donny, are there any other games that are kind of standing out for you guys right now as far as being really popular on the scene?
Well, the killer right now is Fortnite. Fortnite is by far leaps and bounds the most popular game right now. And a lot of that also has to do with you're starting to see some mainstream celebrities getting involved. You have personalities on Twitch like Ninja. This kid was doing fast food. Working at a fast food place before he became a popular streamer on Twitch, and now he's making $500,000 a month. And having Drake show up to play games with him, it's really one thing I want to say about esports, because if any of my colleagues are listening right now, I apologize because I say this all the time, is like when you say like esports, tell me about esports, that's like going up to somebody and saying, tell me about sports.
Right.
Esports is a culmination of so many different sports, and all of these different games, these popular games and not so popular games, all have their own communities, all have their own set of rules. I'll give you for instance, people will look at like Smash Brothers and they'll look at Street Fighter and they'll be like, oh, those are fighting games. Two drastically different communities. Street Fighter, they're talking smack, they're like, ripping on each other. Smash Brothers, they get done with the match and they give each other a hug. Totally different types of communities that you have around them. So it's, as you get deeper into esports, it's really fascinating, just the behavior and what I would say, also the traditions. Like Call of Duty guys, those are bros. Those, you got like, the guys in Optic who are, dressing and driving the Porsches and all that stuff. And then you got Dota 2 players, and they're very analytical, very smart, and very strategic engineering like. So I think that's one of the other really fascinating things about esports. And just,
I use that
So-
same analogy all the time, that if somebody were asking about sports, you would be asking about everything from curling to IndyCar racing to football. It's a huge diversity of people and games. And it's very true with esports. We tend to break down the games into different types. So you have first-person shooters and sports games and, MOBAs, which are the online battle arenas and battle royales. So they're very different, but what I think is important is, as you mentioned, Donny, is that the people that play them tend to be very different too. So the person that is really into Hearthstone or League of Legends is very different than somebody that's a fan of NBA 2K. And you can't just make a blanket statement that says everybody that likes esports likes these things, because they're as different as these, the type of person that would be involved with curling versus, sailing or running or something. They're very different people, and it's very much like that with esports.
So I think not only, what you said about them being very different as, sort of psychographics, but also geography. I mean, you talked about, we're doing things in LA and we're doing things in London and Poland, and there's all these things going on. So talk to us about the geography from your different perspectives.
Yeah, well, the geography is definitely blending. For one thing, you start looking at something like the Overwatch League, which kicked off with teams in Asia, in Europe, in America, all coming to the US to play their matches. But also some sort of interesting pieces to that the ownership of the London team is in San Jose, in Cloud9, right? So there's some really interesting blending of geography. Also, like the NBA franchises, they are located in their communities. So the Portland Trailblazers here in Portland, where I am, they have an esports team, but they go to LA to play. And you would say, well, why don't they live in LA? They don't play their games here, right? So there's some really interesting nuances there. But as you're getting at in terms of geography, there is certain games that are really popular in different parts of the world. We were talking about Rocket League a little while ago, which is another big game. It's very popular in Europe. It's popular all over the world, but they have some great pros that play it there. Same with FIFA, the soccer or football game, is really popular in other parts of the world. Korea has some particular games that are really, really popular, like StarCraft is still massive over there. So it just really depends where you are. And then it's also the age demographics too. The first time I played Overwatch, I put my headset on, and I had actually been playing first, and then I put my headset on and I was listening to the chat, and I realized that everybody on this thing was 10 years old, and it really surprised me. I was like, oh wow, these are kids that I'm playing with. So it really depends on the game, the age. And Fortnite, like Donny said, is really popular with young people right now, although it's popular with people like me too, but it's definitely reaching down into a young demographic. What
are you seeing, Kim?
I am so lucky to be in a neutral position that I get to work with all of them. But, at the end of the day, it's still community, it's culture, it's developer run. The developer has an idea of what they want, and the community follows it, creates it, builds upon it. The players are actually very fun and unique, but yet they're kids, and you see how they all kind of are interacting, even though they do different games. But when we had a DreamHack opportunity to work with Twitch and created a community lounge, I was so blown away that they're still kids at the end of the day, and they're supporting each other. There is more support within this industry than I've ever seen anywhere. And you really do root for the underdog, but then you also look forward to the champions trying to keep up. And it's a variation of everything you could possibly imagine. It is diverse. It's like the Olympics, but it's put inside of a video game experience where, even Saudi Arabia is about to unleash their experience in esports, and there's not a country, a city, a destination that doesn't understand or want to understand what esports is. And we even talked about scholarships and the fact that Twitch Student is working really hard with colleges around the world to create more of an atmosphere for high schoolers and college students to be able to take it on at a level that when they become pro, or if that's what they want to do, they actually have an opportunity. So there's way more going on than we could even discuss in an hour. It's amazing to me. I've worked with Lineage 2 Revolution. I've worked with PUBG. I've worked with Dota 2. I've worked with Call of Duty. I've worked with all of the Blizzard titles. I've worked with Destiny. There's just so many games, and every time we turn around, there's one more and one more and one more. And you think, how are these kids? There can't be that many kids there are that many kids and that many adults still playing, down to the older generation that's still playing World of Warcraft every month and still a part of the bigger picture, you know, and haven't given it up. So it's mind-blowing. There's a never dull moment and a day that you're not watching something on Twitch or somewhere around the world. It's crazy.
So talk to us about, so I have a teenage son, so I know what Twitch is, but I'm going to go on a limb and say not everybody knows what this Twitch is. So tell us what Twitch is.
Do I get to be the lucky one? No, I'm just kidding. I actually work with Twitch, and they're an amazing group of people who are dedicated to, you know, giving a platform. It's almost like a broadcasting, you know, station, but with an understanding that they were so far ahead of themselves back in the day when they realized streaming was everything in content, and to give these opportunities for these kids to come on a channel of their own, or you have games on their own channels, and they're able to stream and build content and interact with the global community at any time around, you know, at any time around the day. It's 24/7. They've come up with creative ways to stream and build a bigger community, and Twitch is known for that experience. Being owned by Amazon just gives it that much more power. But, you know, talk about a creative group of individuals who are dedicated to video gaming at a level that I've never seen before. And they've opened the door for just about anything that you want to stream or deal with content on in that way. So they're the vehicle, if you want to call it, for the digital world to be able to showcase whatever it is that they want to do in a content way.
So I was going to say, oh, go ahead.
Oh, if I can add something too that I think is really fascinating about Twitch, that I think people are who are not familiar with it are gonna have a very hard time understanding this. But I'm gonna try to. I'll speak slowly. So, kids will go onto Twitch. They'll start their own channel, and they will stream themselves playing video games, right? And you can comment on it. There's a chat section in there and comment. And if you're really good at the game, you can actually build a following to the point that people will actually start just giving you money. They'll give you $5, $10, $50, $100, and they'll just start donating to your stream to the point that there are now Twitch celebrities. So there's like, everybody knows Dr. Disrespect. I highly encourage, if you're, check out Dr. Disrespect. He's a fantastic character who has a nice mustache and a mullet and always wears sunglasses, and he's the most awesome man in the world. He'll tell you that. And this is his full-time job. His full-time job is going on, creating this personality and streaming games and interacting with his community. So at any given time, you'll have 20, 30,000 concurrent people just watching him play games and be a goofball. And it's truly what's unique about this is the ultimate democracy for content. This is the community decides what lives and what dies, and they support it with money, with microtransactions. They have money right there that they will give. They will subscribe to somebody's channel, so they'll pay $9 or $15 a month to be a subscriber to that channel, which means they're supporting it. And what they get in return is they'll get recognition from the streamer online, where they'll say, hey, Donnie, thanks for being with me for 8 months. I appreciate it. Thanks for this subscribe. And they'll read off everybody, and then they'll answer questions that the community is throwing out to them. It is so fascinating to watch this dialogue. I think that's one of the special things about esports too, is that unlike, when I was growing up and the Chicago Bulls were the team, and Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and all those people, I didn't get to go out and play basketball with Michael Jordan. In esports, the fans actually, like, some of the pro players would be like, hey, I'm going to practice at this time. First couple of people who respond to me can play with me. You actually get to play with the pro players. The amount of engagement and connection that you have in this community is unreal compared to any other type of competitive environment.
We've got a couple comments and questions coming in from the audience. We want to remind everybody, feel free, if you're joining us live, to use the Q&A portion of Zoom, or you can use the chat function to send our guests questions about the topic today. A couple things. Our own Alex Plaxton pointed out that, in the whole esports versus sports thing, it's kind of like talking about events, right? That there's all that we talk about, we're in the event industry, but there's medical events and financial events and public events and private events and internal events. There's all these these different kinds of events. So it's kind of an interesting comparison to that. And then a friend of the show, Nick Borelli, is on Facebook talking to us there. He says he's a Capcom fighting guy that he used to play in tournaments back in the 90s and still watches a lot of Street Fighter. And he likes my hair.
Or your non-hair,
Exactly.
I think is where we're going with that. So, all right. So we talked a little bit about, we have, let's call them athletes who are playing esports. How do they train? What do they win? I love that they're so engaged. I love that. I think that when we think, I'm going to go to, as a parent, when we think of video games, we tend to think of it as being a solo activity, and they shouldn't be spending so much time doing that. And now that I have a son who's been playing video games for a long time, that is his most socially interactive time. They're on the headsets, they are coming up with strategies, they're talking to each other, it's like ongoing social dialogue, and then they're going out and playing poker, and then they're doing other things. And so it is a very different world than what we thought. And they have these huge tournaments in all kinds of different games. So how do you get good at a video game? How do you get good in esport?
The same way you get to Carnegie Hall. Practice.
Yeah, I mean, they use all the same methods that that people use to prepare for other sports. So most of the pro teams live together, they train together. So they have with the concept of the esports house, where everybody is there, all essentially living around each other. They run through plays and watch video of games that they've played to talk about them. They have coaches, they have nutritionists, they have drug problems. They have all of the same things that go on in sports are going on with esports. And it will not be long. I was picking up my son from school a few weeks ago. He wanted to go play Overwatch with some people, and I thought to myself, what we used to say is, I got to run the kids to soccer practice, and now I'm going to take the kids to Overwatch practice or whatever the game is. But I don't think we're far from that, where you're going to see younger and younger programs for younger and younger kids that are training like athletes. There are high school esports associations. There are lots of college esports associations. There's many colleges where you can get university scholarships to go there by being on their teams. So it's really that ecosystem of training is being built right now, just like it was for all of these major sports that we know and love. 100 years ago, people developed baseball and football and all that infrastructure. That stuff's all being built today around the games that people are playing.
Absolutely. And having worked with them for 8 years, it's been interesting, the metamorphosis of this. Back, it was a bunch of casual players who deciphered that they would want to, bring their friends together and build a team and qualify to get to that round where they would eventually make the qualifying rounds for the event. And before you knew it, they're getting an email that says, we're going to send you to LA, or we're going to send you to, some crazy place that was going to have the tournaments. And these kids were just general kids who, their parents would finally call someone like myself or my team and say, is this for real? Are you kidding me? And the next thing, we're explaining that it's not human trafficking, and that, it's an organized experience, and they're welcome to come. And we had to really help them decipher what it was that their child was doing. And, players, have gone from that to now they're being recruited, and you're talking about massive contracts. And, we've got attorneys now in esports that are trying to decipher who gets what, type of requirements, whether that's an owner of a massive franchise, or that's a kid who is that good that now he's got to work with his parents to sign a contract, like he's going to a massive college or getting drafted to the NFL, and they have no idea the level at which they're being required. They just know they want to play video games and win, and that's an understatement. Now it's just a different development of players. We've got, kids that are learning everything from how not to get injured. I have a former gymnast who works with me, and we're creating the first setup for working with pro players in their training, not just mental, but physical. We've got to deal with their entire, anatomy and what things they have to deal with, their psychological experiences, because I'm there when they lose and I'm there when they win. And we're talking about girlfriend problems. So, there's just it's a whole world in which it's just like Joe said, it's like there are the normal kids. I have 15-year-old twin boys. One is a gamer and the other one likes it a little bit, but would rather surf for his PE in the morning. That's just hilarious. You've got so many different kids. Some of them have, disabilities. Some of them don't, but at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter. I don't notice the disabilities when they video game. It's the craziest thing. They're all in the same player, experience. And it's been really fun to watch thousands of these pro players evolve. And now some of them are in their 20s and dying because they can't play like they used to. And it's rather funny to have the case studies now to say, this has really evolved into something bigger.
It's amazing, and I think that, when we look at, what do they win? Well, they win opportunities to travel and to connect with other people and scholarships. And then, of course, there's huge cash prizes. So it's an amazing and interesting time. So Brent, let's look at some of the next things that kind of go a little bit, stick into the event side of it a little bit.
Yeah, it's exactly where I wanted to go was into the event side. I did want to ask real quick, Joe brought up an interesting point about having kind of the same problems as other sports. I'm curious, I know you said each community, obviously, in each game has its own kind of organization behind it, but is there, such a thing as, limiting performance enhancing drugs, being able to not, hit up with 1,000 hits of caffeine before you go in or something along those lines? Are we starting to see those kinds of rules starting to be implemented?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of discussion around this in esports. One is cheating, which is, in terms of cheating, could be hacking games or modding computers in ways where you can cheat. But there's also the physical side, and that can be using drugs like Adderall and other things that help you focus, or it could be stimulants. It is a problem. No, I don't think they've exactly found the answers yet, but they will. Because it's a developing area, and we want people to be safe and have a clean playing field like we would with regular traditional sports.
I suspected that was the case, but okay, let's get into the event side. We've got to bring this back together. This is EventIcons after all, so we need to start. We could just talk about the games all day, but I think we might lose some of our audience on that. So I want to talk a little bit about the support that goes in behind the scenes on these things. What kind of people do you have on the planning team? How is it similar to quote unquote, more mainstream events? And of course, these are becoming mainstream events, so it's not fair to say that anymore. More, let's say, a traditional conference. Maybe that's a better way of putting it, or festival. What would be the differences? Donny, let's start with you on the more production side. Is there anything that you see different in these types of events as opposed to more traditional conferences?
Yeah, well, what's really interesting is when I first stepped into esports, really the event itself is all about the broadcast. Most organizations focus on broadcast first and the actual live in-person experience second. Not everybody. There are some organizations out there that have turned into festivals like DreamHack, the Intel Extreme Masters in Poland. That blew my mind. That was 173,000 people and massive activations all over the place. That was crazy. But for the most part, there's a lot of infrastructure put into that broadcast, because that broadcast is everything, especially for third-party organizations where they rely upon the sponsorship dollars and that. So the amount of management that goes into and just sheer equipment that's required to create a television-like experience with the stream is quite intense. I'll even say that the type of people that work behind the scenes are some really specialized type of people, community managers, people who are, managing the community that's out there online and, responding to them. Even the switchers in the games. So you actually have to, like, for instance, like, Counter-Strike Go. That's a really popular title. Think about it, that when they're in the game and you're actually watching the game, you have to have somebody who knows all of the maps, knows how to identify where players are positioned and be able to cut to them within the game. So if you think about it, you have somebody who is very familiar and very understanding of strategy of teams, and they have to be able to transition and cut through it, working with the broadcaster to know where the action is and keep it interesting. That there's not a lot of people who can do that very well, and so I think some organizations make it look too easy, because what we've been seeing is other production companies going, oh, we can do this. We'll set up some cameras and blah, blah, blah. And they quickly find out just how many moving parts there are to the actual production side of these things.
Sort of reminds me of when Fox first started broadcasting hockey, and they'd have the blue dot following the puck, and all of us in Canada were just like, dudes, can't you find the puck?
Exactly.
But yeah, you're right, that's so specialized. It makes my brain hurt just thinking about trying to remember a map and where people would go. So
that's a whole new world of show calling right there.
Yeah, it is. It is. I also say that, the audience itself, while they are incredibly engaged with what's going on, one thing that kind of surprises me, and I'd be curious to hear Kim and Joe's opinion about this, but one of the first things I noticed at a tournament was they would go to break, and then in the audience, they would show like a video in loop or something like that, and all the kids would go on their phone, and there was no mobile app. There was no mobile engagement. So there are some things in the esports industry that's missing, that we traditionally expect in the regular events industry, that is not happening in there. And I think there is actually some great opportunities actually in the esports industry to bring in some of those best practices. The thing about esports, and I might get in trouble for saying this, but the biggest problem with esports is it's being run by people who do esports, is that they're not necessarily, on the entertainment side, and they're not on the meeting planning side. That being said, those people themselves would not be able to do esports. So it's kind of like we're watching the internet being invented, and everybody's kind of all figuring this out and figuring out the business model. So, the event side of it is, it's really fascinating. I'd like to say that we all know what we're doing, but I think we're still figuring it all out. We're still figuring out what a live event should be. We got the stream down really well, but the live event itself, people are trying new things, and there are new organizations getting into the mix with it.
I could agree with that 100%. And I think the add to that is I kind of created instead of terming esports, what is it? I actually work from the hotel side and then from the planner side, which is actually like something that is not really understood in the esports industry yet, being one of the few that understands it. But you can take it in a hotel setting where you have a vertical market of corporate America, who then is working with another vertical called the entertainment industry. And somehow, because they don't know how to talk to each other as it is, and they create their own havoc, decided to marry each other and create this baby called esports. And all of a sudden, here's this thing that is supposed to create a community effort and draw everybody in the esports circle, which would be, again, your publishers, your developers, your brands, the production teams, you name the pieces, and they all try to work together, but there's 50,000 things going on and nobody's communicating. So you've got the legal side of corporate trying to figure out how to even just function from a legal side. The accounting department doesn't know what they're paying for. And then you've got the entertainment industry who changes things on a 5-minute basis like we're all used to in the entertainment industry. But everything's been focused on the entertainment side of it, not on the corporate side and not on the sponsor side. So the activation side of it is even more hilarious, because what we've done in events our entire 20 years with any corporate environment that you work with, if it's McDonald's, they bring their food. You taste it, you touch it, you smell it, you see it, you hear it. It's all about the 5 senses. They have yet to understand and kind of uncover what we've all known in the event industry our entire lives. So we're getting there. Razer, all of these major sponsors that have been in the esports circle, they're the ones who are basically really trying to, do some interaction with not just the community, but figuring out how the pro players work. And I'm telling them that in the hotel and hospitality side, we can activate in a way that production just doesn't have the opportunity, because it's mainly digital. We're talking about let's do what the 5 senses unfold. And from there, you can really create this interaction that yet has been understood. And I think once they realize that there are 2 or 3 segments that make up the event world, they're going to be rudely awakened to what we all know already, but don't want to, nobody will listen to us because we're just crazy at this point.
I feel like, so Tony asked in the chat, so where are the best business opportunities in this emerging segment in the next 1 to 3 years? And I think between the last 3 comments, you guys have covered about 17 of them. So there's a lot of opportunity to really, as you said, change and make this actually an event experience versus what's happening now, which is really more just what it is. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see what happens.
Can I jump in and just sort of build on that? But you think about what the experience is most like, and what it is most like. Brant, you said, how are these like traditional events, or how are they dissimilar? They're most like sports events or concerts. So from a production value, and as Donny said, that sort of emphasis is on a live broadcast. So the experience of the person that goes to it is to go and sit down in the stands and watch that, and very much like a concert when you're in between bands. And I've been saying this for years, Donny, as well. It's like between the bands, why isn't there something going on? Why do they just turn on that crappy jazz music and watch the roadies take the stuff off the stage? It's like there should be something happening. But that's very similar to what happens in a lot of these events, is that you go in, you sit down, you watch, and then you leave. And I really feel like the opportunity for a lot of these events is to build around that, to have more, because you've got this community together live. And so there should be the trade show around it, like you mentioned at Intel Extreme Masters in Katowice in Poland. That was one of the things that they built up around it, was a show. And so there is a lot of stuff that can happen, and there's some really neat cultural pieces that we haven't touched on with the community, with things like cosplay, where people are coming in costume. So it lends itself to people wanting to talk to each other and meet each other and things. So I think that's where the experience, we hope, will develop in sort of a different direction than pro sports and concerts, which has been kind of all about seeing what's on the stage, which I would say is sort of like the heavy end of the room. All the stuff's going on at the stage. There's so much more that could happen between the audience, because they're this great community that want to hang out together and want to play games, and so that's where I think a lot of the development will happen.
They're doing what they call watch parties around Overwatch. The pro teams are doing these watch parties, and what's amazing to me is like the professional team will like do a watch party at a Dave and Buster's, and they'll put out like one announcement on Facebook, and 700 people show up.
Totally,
I mean, like, this is a community that everybody thinks we're all on our screens and on our headsets and all that stuff. Honestly, we want to connect. We all want to get together as gamers. We want to be around each other. We want to cheer and root for our teams around other, fellow, gamers. And when you have an audience that is that passionate, you have a massive opportunity that I feel is not really being taken advantage of to its fullest. I think there's so much more opportunity out there to really engage with this audience in an authentic way in the actual event space.
Yeah. And there's real stickiness with these games. It's like we mentioned, some of these games, we might consider them sort of niche-y. Like we mentioned, some of this Street Fighter or Smash or something like Paladins or Smite, but those audiences are super enthusiastic about that game. So if you do something specific for them, they love it, because that's their jam, and that's really fun. So events that can tap into that passion are going to do really well.
Yeah, and I can add too that if you get to know the younger audience, I think it's hard because as a parent, we already know our teenage kids, but we really don't understand the different levels at which, one day they can't throw the trash away, but the next minute they're in a headset and they're talking like adults and they're winning money, or they're getting qualified for massive tournaments and flying around the world. And we don't know the psychology of that. So if as parents we're struggling, how in the world is the corporate America side of it supposed to understand it? So it goes back to just marketing 101 and sales 101. The same insanity that we hated back in the 80s and 90s is the same insanity that we need to have happen here. If you're going to market a product and you want to sell it, you have to engage it. You have to interact with it. You got to get people to understand it and want it and buy it. And it's not just about what skin you're going to buy on the game. I mean, there's so much more to that. So getting the brands to go back to where we were in the 80s and 90s and the way we handle things, it's just old school. Just go back to what we know, get on the phone and actually make a call, have an interaction, do focus groups, talk to people like who we are in this industry. And we can give you 100 ways to do this in a fun, encouraging way, and spend some money correctly. Stop spending money in ways that you put it towards an area where it's going to die. Don't do that. Ask somebody who knows what they're doing and put that money in places where it's going to actually bring you sales. It's just very simple, but unfortunately we are at a level in our career where we've done this a lot. I mean, 500 events later for me, and I've done enough of this that I know what works and what doesn't. But even in the esports and the video gaming side of this, the community is so excited. They just they want to touch it. The five senses, I can't go into that enough. We all know that as event people, like you have to enjoy it. The food you eat, the drink you drink, everything we do. Yeah, exactly. It's all about what you enjoy and implementing it into a game where you're going 3-dimensional instead of 1-dimensional. Bring the character to life, bring the map to life. Call of Duty did that quite a bit with COD XP. It was one of the greatest experiences that they could have put together because it was Disneyland for gamers. They just wanted it to go forever, and it couldn't because it was an event. Same idea. There's a lot of developers now realizing fan engagement is so much more than what it's been, and it's not all about the broadcast, although it's a very big part of it. It's so much more than that.
So it sounds to me like, what we need, Alex was saying, is this kind of like other industries where people sort of fall into it? But I think what it sounds to me like from what all of you have said, that what we have is this very interesting intersection now of sport, esport, and that methodology that needs to be tied into the fan engagement in a way that some teams are doing really well and some are still struggling with that idea of corporate. Let's talk a little bit about the numbers, because I think that when we start to look at, some of the statistics, and Donny, I'm going to go to you because you had some very big statistics earlier that I think are really interesting, because we need to understand as event professionals that this is a real thing. So.
Yeah, so there's roughly about 250,000 enthusiasts. And an enthusiast is identified as somebody who is engaging with this content throughout the week. I think the stat, depending on which researcher reaches, 4 to 5 times a week, and at large segments, many hours they're watching, consuming this content. There was when Intel Extreme Masters was in Poland a year ago, Forbes magazine had a really great article that said, I believe it was like electronic gaming tournament has 10 million more viewers than president's inauguration. They had 46 million people watch this thing. And this event, keep in mind, this is not an hour-long event. This event goes 2 weeks. So, when you think about the level of engagement, the level of people consuming this content, it's massive. It's staggering numbers. We did a Dota 2 tournament just recently in DC, and it was a minor, right? And we were getting between 130 to 160,000 concurrent, about 20 million views, and that was average. That was okay. Now, when you explain that to somebody in the events industry, in traditional events, and a general session, if a general session gets 50,000 viewers, the event producer is, ecstatic about that, right? So I think, when you look at these numbers, to bring this back to the events industry, I think, and I was saying this earlier, before we went broadcasting, think about these kids who are interacting in this way and participating in this way digitally. And think about one day they're going to have jobs and be adults, and they're going to come to your event. And if they walk in and there's like fluorescent lighting and a PowerPoint deck, you're in trouble. You're in deep trouble. Because these kids are learning on smart boards and second screen technology. They're streaming their classes online and then having a conversation when they come to the lecture. This is the way that they're talking. This is the way they're engaging. And so, the events industry, I think, could actually learn something from this way that these digital natives are participating in this space.
It's an absolute reality. So now, you guys come from event backgrounds. So what are going to be we understand what those audience expectations are about to become, sort of. So what are going to be some of the other things that we can do that go into creating those stellar in-person experiences? Online is online. It's going to be its own, you're going to get those great broadcasters, but how do we create those stellar in-person experiences?
Yeah, you want me to jump in on that?
Yes.
I would say you always start as we do in any event, by understanding the audience and what's going to get them excited. So if you're doing a Fortnite tournament and you bring in Ninja, he's the top Fortnite streamer, the audience is going to be very excited about that, right? And so you start by, really looking at what they're going to get excited about, and then build experiences that include, like Donny mentioned, interactivity, and also play opportunities. These folks want to play. Ultimately, they're there to watch, and they learn by watching the pros, and they have fun watching the pros. But they're wanting to learn, or to get experience by seeing how they play the game, and giving them an opportunity to play is really important. So, and this is very difficult, because if you think about it from a planning perspective, if I bring in 100 stations, 100 PCs to let people play, but I've got 12,000 people there, it's kind of like Disneyland, where you're going to wait in line for 8 hours and get to play for 2 minutes. So it's a real difficult balance to try to give play opportunities that are meaningful. So you have to really think about that in terms of tournaments, maybe the single elimination tournaments that anybody could compete in, and then leaderboards that get people excited, and finding ways to participate. But there is a lot of the traditional stuff in events that we can do, like matchmaking, small group meetups and things. So if at your event you do a cosplayers lounge or a high school players area, this is really helpful for these communities, because they are mostly online, and this is their opportunity to meet each other in person.
Hey, Tahira, and if I can say one thing, because I do want to address the broadcast, that there's something that we could definitely learn from the broadcast. So in the events industry, our whole thing is, okay, we're going to embed a player on our website, and people are going to watch the general session from that website, or we're going to send out a link, or we're going to send people to a platform, and you're going to go there and you're going to register to watch the content. The esports industry is completely different. They don't force you to go anywhere. They syndicate the stream. They put it where all the eyeballs are. So they're pushing it to Facebook, to Twitter, to Twitch, to YouTube. Their whole thing is get it out in front of many places as possible. And therefore, they get unbelievable numbers. And I think we as event planners have to kind of think about that too. Yeah, I understand that you want to get, you want to get their email address so you can market to them after the fact and things like I understand that. But if you're really trying to reach an audience online that's not attending your event, maybe that's something we should play around with in the events industry, where we take a piece of content, and instead of forcing people to go somewhere to get it, we put it everywhere, and see if we can attract new people to participate and then eventually come back. And that's one thing that the esports industry does really, really well.
It really feels like that both the esports industry and the more traditional conference industry have a lot to learn from each other. That there's so much, there's so much to be said for not reinventing the wheel when it comes to events. But then there's also, when you do get kind of a new perspective brought into an industry, getting that fresh and taking the good from both, what works in traditional events, and then what's, like you said, Donny, it's so amazing to me that there's so many events that are still really hoarding their content and really making it so that it's inconvenient to watch it afterwards, or they're, trying to really lock down who can see it and when and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to just, like you said, making it available everywhere. And if anything, this industry has shown that that's how you can build incredible communities, and move on into, incredible amounts of economic opportunity for both the people who are participating and the people who are behind the scenes.
And even take it one step beyond that and do merchandise and talk about what makes it a rare experience. Like, we're all awful about how many t-shirts we have from everywhere around the world because we were in Bali. Like, you'll go and you'll, buy something because that's where you were, and it reminds you of that experience. And it goes back to all of those interactions where what does this experience share that no other one does, or who won that year, and how do we, like the Dodgers winning, a World Series, everybody's got every product with the Dodgers on it if they're a big fan, because they're never going to forget that last home run or whatever it was that makes them wear that cap that, reminds them forever that their team was amazing. I mean, there's so many just back to basic experiences that people have forgotten about in this side of it as well.
And I mean, if you think about it, like look at the music industry. Look what streaming music did to the music industry. It's the same. It's the same principle. They, we used to tell musicians way back when, are you better off selling 1.99 download or having 1,000 people stream your song? Where are you better? So now the music industry, it's all about merch. It's all about going to see the band live. It's actually driving more people to these massive concerts and festivals by people just giving away their music or making it accessible on Spotify and that. I think you can apply the same rules to esports. There, so many people are watching online that when DreamHack comes to their neighborhood, they're selling out these events in record times, and the events industry might want to take a little note of that. Because where are they better off? If they give away some of their content for free, but it drives way more attendance to your event. Because everybody for a long time was like, oh, it's going to cannibalize things. Well, we have two industries that have fundamentally proven that wrong. That's just not the case.
Kim and Donny, both of you were talking about live event experiences, and I would just add that some companies are sort of making the opposite mistake where they're saying, we don't want to do live event experiences in the esports area. We just want to put our logo onto a stream. But they're going to miss out on that. Touch it, feel it, smell it. Yes, you will smell it depending which geography you're in. But it's really important that we hit all those senses, and that's what the live experience is. And as we know, because we do this, there's huge value in it. If all you look at is, the cost per impression, and you run ads that are, yes, they will hit millions of people, but will they still break through and have that emotional impact that a live event would have? And we hope that people don't make that mistake and just drop out of that live event space, because it's really important.
Jack, the beef jerky, Jackal Links, where they have Sasquatch and, they had that whole Hangry campaign. They did this really brilliant thing in the esports space where they found 3 influencers, 3 streamers who are known to be a little sassy at times and get a little angry, lose their cool. And what they did is they had them eat beef jerky and talk to their audience about your hangry moments. Have you ever, because all of us gamers have done this, where we have played for 8 hours and then my wife comes down, she goes, what did you eat today? And I go, and all of a sudden I realize I'm a little testy and I'm a little short and the game's not working right because I keep dying here. And so they were like, hey, you as a community, talk about times where you lost your cool because you were hungry. You were hungry while playing games all the time while they're eating the beef jerky. It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. Finding more ways to do authentic things like that with this digital community. I think that's where you're really going to find some neat ways to engage with audiences. And I think the events industry could do some of those things too. I always talk about, like, as a speaker, if I'm going to be speaking at your event, give me an opportunity to talk to the audience before the event and give them homework or give them something to do so that when they come there, they're a little bit more engaged, a little bit more excited. They're not just reading, the synopsis there. There's just other things we can do with content online.
You know what? I'm so happy that we were here today. And so I'm going to use a little Dr. Seuss quote, which is like, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened, because we're at the top of the hour. The end of the spin class, as it were. I cannot thank Kim and Joe and Donny enough for joining us today. It's such an interesting new space for event professionals to dive into, and it's amazing. So Brant, let's wrap this baby up.
Let's take it home. First, Donny Neufuss, where can people find out more about you and what you're up to these days?
You can see me, you can find me on at Donny PRG. Also on my LinkedIn, I'm generally updating that quite a bit. And then I do have a blog, esportsforallsorts.com, where I like to pontificate about these observations.
Nice. Thanks, Donny, for joining us. Kim Meltzer, where can people find out more about you?
I'm learned to be on Twitter more than anything, although I'm on Instagram, but you can find me at Esports Event Mom or Kim A. Meltzer. Both have some unique placement in content, and on Kim A. Meltzer, I do my best to give a lot of information on what's going on in esports. So if you don't know anything about esports, I'll give you the headlines and keep you abreast of what's new based on the depth of the contacts that I have in my life. You'll catch me on Instagram, and in June I will be at the Rocket League Championship Series 5, Season 5 in London, June 8th through the 10th, and we'll be supporting Psionics and the entire experience out there. But you'll catch me just about anywhere you want to look up Kim A. Meltzer or Esports Event Mom.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. And Joe, how about you?
Yeah, if you want to get in touch with me on Twitter, I'm at EventFuturist. Website's eventfuturist.com, or Joe at eventfuturist.com, and love to talk to you.
Well, thank you for joining us, Joe. We also want to thank those of you that joined us live: Allison, Jamal, Jeff, Nick, Reed, Jim, Tony, Lisa, and Sue for joining us right towards the end there. Thanks, everybody, for joining us live. That is the best way to join us at EventIcons. It's recorded live each Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can watch behind the scenes on Facebook if you kind of want to just dip in, check it out, see what it's like. Then you say, I think I like this EventIcons thing. I might want to subscribe. And you can do that, of course, at event-icons.com. That is the best way. So you're going to get notified every week. You're going to be able to join the Zoom meeting. You're going to be able to send your questions directly into our brains via the Zoom Q&A and the chat panel and all that kind of stuff. But of course, not everybody can join us live, so be sure and subscribe as well on iTunes, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, SoundCloud, whatever your favorite what is a podcast app? I don't blanked on what those things are called. Podcast app. I use it, pretty much every day. Let us know what you think. Join us on Twitter. Use hashtag EventIcons and tell us what you think about this show, what you think the opportunities are in esports, and maybe find out ways to get involved in your favorite esports. Let us know what icons you want to see on the show. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on EventIcons.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #EventIcons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway.
And join the social conversation. Sponsored by Little Bird Told Media.
Just tag your post with #EventIcons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #EventIcons.
Kim, so nice to meet you.
Same here.
Joe,
I want to stay in touch.